This is Lecture 9, Australia and Oceania. When we look at Australia and Oceania, we see that Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea are the big countries here. Then we have all these little bitty small countries and territories. And so I'm going to try, I know this is just an introduction to geography class, so I'm not going to try to go through and tell you all about Tuvalu and Fiji and the Marshall Islands and all of that. But I am going to mention at least Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea. Before I get started with that, we have the deepest point on Earth, the Mariana Trench, which is south of Japan, kind of north of Papua New Guinea, not too far from the American territory of Guam. The point is actually called Challenger Deep. And it's so deep, in fact, that if you were to take Mount Everest, tallest mountain in the world, which is 29,000 feet, and dump it into that trench, you would still have a mile of distance between the ocean surface and where Everest would be. So it's a very, very, very deep point in the Earth. Another feature I want to show you is an atoll. I wish I had a better diagram of this now that I think about it. An atoll basically is where a volcano dies out. And as it dies out, it stops erupting, coral starts growing on the top of the ring. And that's what this is. This is the ring of the volcano. And the coral keeps growing and developing until it finally surfaces. And when the coral kind of dies off, it turns into this fine powder. Sand is what it is. So sand basically is dead coral, like from a coral reef. And this is the ring on the outside of a volcano. And this is the inside of the volcano that's been slowly filled in with coral. So that's what an atoll is. And there's a lot of those that you'll find throughout the Pacific. The most important guy in the region is James Cook. He sailed for the British during the 1800s and 1700s. And he sailed through, you can see all these little squiggly lines all through here. He went through what they called New Holland at that time. We call it Australia today, New Zealand. There's Cook Islands are named after him, Polynesia. When we look at Australia, Australians speak English because they were a territory of the British. The people who used to live there by themselves are called Aborigines. They still live there. There have actually been a lot of debates about them recently because back in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, Australians would come in and take children from Aborigine families and force white or give them to white families to raise, trying to make them whiter. And recently, past 2 years, Australia has actually apologized for that because they said, okay, this is wrong, we shouldn't have done this. But it was just kind of an intriguing thing that they did. Australians are also known as Aussies. That's them right there. But that's the whole country of Australia. It's very, very dry on the interior. So most everybody in Australia lives along the fringes. They actually had a gold rush back in the late 1800s. They discovered gold and a lot of people moved to Australia. Today, Australia is dealing with a lot of Asian immigrants. A lot of people are moving from India, Sri Lanka, China, Thailand, moving to Australia for better jobs, better opportunity, better homes, and freedom of speech. Because Australia has a government similar to the United States, you can have free speech and free press and things like that. The Great Barrier Reef is this long reef, coral reef, just off the coast of Australia. It's actually the world's longest living thing. It's or largest living thing. It's huge, like 2,000 miles in length. Australia is also known for their deadly sharks, great whites especially, and the deadly snakes. Some of the sea snakes of Australia are particularly deadly, like kill you like that. So Australia is dangerous, but they're also known for their things like their kangaroos and the wallabies, koala bears and such. Australians are also known for their surfing. You could do something called a walkabout, which is going into the interior and spending a little time in there communing with nature. The largest city in Australia is Sydney, and this is Ayers Rock, also called Uluru, and it's like a big holy site for the Aborigine people of Australia. It's in the middle of nowhere in the central part of the country. If you ever notice the Australian flag, real quick note here, the Australian flag is like the British flag, but it's got a couple little stars on the side of it. That is the official flag of Australia. This, though, is the unofficial flag of Australia. Kangaroo and boxing gloves on a green background. And if you ever notice Australian sports teams, like the national soccer team or the national rugby team or whatever, they're always dressed in this because they want to be more known for their green and gold than for being formerly belonging to the British. You also have New Zealand, which is right next door, which is made up of two islands, the North Island and the South Island. And since this is on the other side of the equator, the further south you go, the colder it gets. So up here we have tropical lands, there's a little bit of desert, and then it starts to get kind of rainforesty, and then it gets into colder lands down here when you get closer to Stewart Island. But it is very mountainous through the middle. They have what's called the Southern Alps, named after the Alps of Europe. They grow a lot of sheep there, and those sheep produce a lot of wool. And it's just gorgeous there. If you ever watched Lord of the Rings, the movie, Lord of the Rings was filmed in New Zealand. The Hobbit, which is coming out, was also filmed in New Zealand. And it's just beautiful because of all the different environments and climates and biomes there. We also have Papua New Guinea, which is this half of this island. There's a lot of tribes that live there, and there are more languages in Papua New Guinea than anywhere else in the world. There are a lot of cannibals that live there. They'll eat other people. Yes, they still do that. If a family member dies, the family members will come around and eat the body. I know it's kind of nasty to think about, but to help that person live on through them. So it's an interesting kind of symbolic move on their behalf. But there are a lot of little bitty tribes because it's very mountainous through the central part of Papua New Guinea. And so there are all these little bitty tribes that each have their own language. Then we have Melanesia. Melanesia are the groups of islands just northeast of Australia, including Papua New Guinea. Melanesia means brown or black islands because the people there are kind of brownish black. And you have places like Fiji that are part of Melanesia. But there's a lot of really beautiful water out there. Next we have Polynesia. Poly meaning multiple or many, Nesia meaning islands. And these are little bitty islands and lots of little bitty islands. You have the Caroline Islands, Guam, the Marianas, Marshall Islands. A lot of these are owned by the United States, but some of these are part of the Federated States of Micronesia, which is another country on its own.